Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Mr. McMahon, the documentary. This is chapter 3, the screw job. You know how it rolls by now. We are going to react to all the accusations and all the claims that we made in each and every episode. NXSteve is in the hot seat with me once again. Good to have you aboard, NXSteve. And the screw job, we're touching on Wendy Richter, of course, being screwed out of her women's championship, all the way to Bret the Hitman Hart being screwed out of the WWF championship at the end of the episode. So let's dive in, and we're going to talk about Wendy Richter at the beginning, going through the 80s. She was the women's champion, of course. She was crowned that, and she was champion for quite a while. Wouldn't give the championship up. She was quite upset, didn't want to do business of putting over the next star. And Mr. McMahon said, well, look, this isn't your title, this isn't your prop, this is my prop, this is my story, my show. I write the script, and if you're not going to do business, I'm going to find a way to get the title off of you. It was against a masked wrestler in the ring. He said at some point there would be a roll-up attempt, and he basically just told the referee to count to 3. Even though Wendy Richter's shot was up at the count of 1, the ref continued to make the count of 3, and basically we got a new champion crown, which was revealed to be the Fabulous Moolah. And as Vince said, then a reaction to that, because I guess business is business. Yes, the fans might be upset, but he says, tough. Life isn't always easy or fair.
Yeah, I mean, like honestly, when I saw the title, and instantly your brain goes to Montreal. But then I know about this screw job. I'm pretty sure it's from the Fabulous Moolah, Dark Side of the Ring, and they actually talk about this in that episode of that documentary as well. So I completely forgot about this one. So to start on that point, and the fact that it is the Fabulous Moolah as well, who obviously has some controversy about her as well. But I mean, don't get me wrong. Like we've heard it so many times before that it is his business, and if you don't want to play ball, he will make you play ball the way he wants to play ball. If you're not willing to do the job, sorry, Vince is going to have it his own way. And if only we kind of knew that this was like foreshadowing what was going to happen. I mean, it probably wouldn't have changed anything, but it's kind of the first real time that we see something like this from Vince when it's actually put out on his product on TV. And you can imagine, obviously, a lot of people are a bit confused. But I think the saving grace with this is obviously that women's wrestling still hasn't taken off at this point. And maybe he spared his blushes on the basis that half the people might not have even really known what was going on. Like half of them may not have even been paying attention to the fact that obviously the time it's a women's match and all those things playing into it.
Yeah, perhaps he got away with it on that one. I mean, in some ways, this is where I'm trying to look at this from both sides, because in one way, if you were, I don't know, working somewhere, say you were actually we mentioned about the Rocky movies earlier on, and this Hogan was involved in that. What if it was a case of, I'm not losing to Rocky? Well, actually, I think you are in the Rocky movie. You don't get that sort of say in Hollywood. If you're going to go and do your job and you're meant to be working in the supermarket, you're not going to stack that shelf. You're going to get told to go. You're going to get fired because your job is to stack that shelf. Well, in this case, Wendy Richter's job was to drop the championship. That's what it was in the scripted story. So in that way, I have some sympathy for Vince. However, where I do not have the sympathy in a way is kind of the fan reaction, because I understand he does what he needs to do for the business, but when it's to something that could be of taking away fan enjoyment, that's when I start to question, well, hang on, it's not just this it happens, it's on other things as well. Obviously, we look with some of the famous questionable storyline endings we've had to a number of stories in the past, when his idea is kind of tough. I suppose it's kind of the analogy he has with a lot of things that goes on, because that's what he wants to see.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they've picked this as well obviously plays into the screw job, but where there is, like, I'm sitting here thinking now that there are a few other controversial moments that they easily could have picked from, like, for instance, Legion of Doom, I forget which one it was, but one of them coming out drunk to one of the WrestleManias, and like the fact that they've gone with this, and I don't know, like I said, it's obviously it's foreboding and foreshadowing what the rest of the episode is about. If you've been living underneath a rock for the last 4 years and never heard of the Montreal Screwjob, but yeah, I mean, I know what you're talking about. Like I said, it's a bit of a shitty move to do. Do you know what I mean? To screw someone like that, but it's 50 and one of half of another, and I don't think there's any right answer with this one. It's kind of like Vince is doing the right thing in his eyes. Wendy's playing hardball, and like it's just inevitably come out like this, unfortunately.
And obviously, she seemed to acknowledge as well the play that was made. Apparently, a nod was made backstage, allegedly, and then that was the last that she was seen in the company at that time period. So she was done with the World Wrestling Federation at that point in the 80s. But we go back to what was the end of episode 2, which, of course, was the steroids trial as well, where Vince was meant to be allegedly charged with accusations of supplying superstars with steroids or telling them to go and do so. Of course, they had Hogan, of course, who had made an oath, so he wouldn't be charged if he would stand against Vince McMahon, which he did. He goes to sit into the court, but actually, he doesn't go against Vince McMahon. He actually says things in support of Vince McMahon, saying, that he never, sold steroids to Hogan. He never told Hogan to do so. So in the end, it ended up working in Vince McMahon's favor. The verdict was actually given, and it was a not guilty verdict. So Vince McMahon was actually set free at the end of this court case. And of course, there was a bit of celebration afterwards. But there was one personal documentary who actually suggested, though, that there could have been some allegations of where maybe there was some reach out for witnesses, maybe jury members as well. So unfortunately, there could be still a bit of a dampened victory that comes with this.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Brett re-emphasizes the point that, because Hogan essentially says, and Vince never told me to take them, everyone was taking them before, like, regardless. And Brett kind of says the same thing. He goes, even Brett says, I don't ever recall Vince ever telling anyone to do that or selling them to anyone. And I kind of take Brett's word a bit more for it, because obviously everything that happened between them, like after obviously the Montreal Screwjob, and for him to turn around and say that, I find it a bit more plausible. And obviously, then everything comes out with the trial, and I think the guy is, I think it's David Shoemaker, I think his name is. He's the author of the Squared Circle. He turned around and says that because of essentially the prosecution were hoping that Hogan was their golden goose that was going to get Vince McMahon convicted, and unfortunately, it doesn't play out how it was supposed to. Essentially, due to lack of evidence, because they were so busy trying to rush this through, thinking that Hogan was going to essentially rat out Vince, and he doesn't do it. And the trial falls on deaf ears, and do you know what I mean? Vince walks out a free man, and it's just one of them things where it's a case of, Vince obviously knew that the guys were doing it. And that's it. But like Hogan said, everyone was doing it before anyway. And it's kind of like, it's almost like Vince is turning a blind eye to it. And it obviously doesn't make him look good in anyone's eyes, the fact that he should know it. But obviously, everything that's happening in that time period, like we said in the previous episode with sports stars in for various sports, and people succumbing to death because of steroid abuse and all this kind of stuff, it doesn't paint him in the best picture, and it's kind of like this is like the beginning of the real low point for WWE.
Absolutely, and of course, with losing their top star as well to WCW at this point, obviously it's time then to look for a new star. Obviously, Lex Luger is the one that was chosen. The Lex Express, of course, was massively popular in 1993 throughout the summer going into SummerSlam. But I can say now from a personal opinion, really, I think creative decisions, along with perhaps maybe not the same amount of charisma as what Hogan would have had, didn't really take Luger to that next level. Eventually, Bret Hart would be the chosen one. Of course, it was the Royal Rumble win, of course, the dual win in 94, which then led to WrestleMania 10, where Luger didn't get the job done, but Bret Hart did. And Vince said, look, at this time, we're going through a transitional period, obviously, with newer stars, with the likes of Razor Ramon, with Diesel, of course, aka Kevin Nash, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart. It was a new generation at this point, obviously going into that era after 1994, and Bret was, he said perhaps not the most charismatic, but at the same time was a safe pair of hands. Interestingly, he said that I don't know if he said strange family or unique family was his description for the Hart family, but certainly was questionable of them. But said that with Bret, it was that the company was in safe hands while they figured things out.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I couldn't go over the fact that Bret still talks about himself in the third-person perspective. That just jars me in itself. And I was like, what are you doing, man? Like, just talk like a normal human being. But, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's obviously we're going to move on to the Monday Night War stuff. And it's kind of like, just in itself with Luger. And I remember I remember when Luger came in, like the first time that they brought him on TV, and they've just got him posing in mirrors, and I'm like, I don't understand what the appeal of this guy is meant to be, because he just doesn't, like, do you know what I mean? And I'm like, I don't know, 10 years old at this point, whenever it is, and I could never understand the appeal of Lex Luger. Like, yes, he had the look and the physique of a bodybuilder, which everyone knows Vince loves, but as a character, I don't think I can ever get. I don't think at any point I ever got behind Lex Luger, because I just didn't find him relatable at all.
No, especially as the narcissist, that was a very questionable gimmick, to say the very least. At least with the Lex Express, I could understand what they were going with, but yeah, just didn't resonate, just didn't connect with me in the same way. And I was I was a Bret Hart fan, so of course I wanted to see him go back to the top, which of course did happen. But obviously WCW made the charge, having Hogan then on their ranks, and like you said, Ted Turner, said to Eric, "What can we do to compete with WWF at the time?" And Eric said, "Look, they're on Mondays, they're on prime time Mondays, and we as a show are on Saturday afternoons, like 6:05. It's not the same ballpark to compete." So Ted Turner turned around and said, Nitro Mondays live. He does say 2 hours on the documentary. A bit of true facts here. Doesn't start as a 2-hour show. It's a 1-hour show for at least the first nearly year of the show. I think it's some point in 96 or 97 that changes, but it's a 1-hour show to begin with. But either way, the Mall of America is the first live Monday Night Show, going head-to-head on TNT with Monday Night Raw. Of course, they mentioned about how the fact as well they've been sort of taking talent from WWF. Of course, late 1994, Randy Savage, of course, doesn't agree a new contract with WWF. He then actually goes over to WCW. Again, a lighter schedule, bigger payday. That's what it comes down to. But I think the big one was, obviously, we're talking about the Lex Express. Lex Luger was actually on a handshake agreement, not a proper contract. So he was actually on a, I think it was just after SummerSlam 1995 was taped and shown on WWF TV, to then appear at the end of the first Nitro at the Mall of America the following night to be under contract in WCW. It was a real sort of whoa moment, because I think a lot of people at that point think, well, what's this WWE guy doing here? And obviously the fact is then it starts making that product looking edgy, looking cool, because it's live and it's got something exciting about it. And obviously Eric would continue with that. He would sort of say, I'm going to try and poke the bear to get everyone to come and watch this show. And obviously he would give away the results of a taped show that WWF had done. They'd been like someone's 3-4 weeks old, so he'd say, look, this was the result. Shawn Michaels super kicked the guy. Just stay here, you don't need to go anywhere else. And obviously by continuing to keep taking the talent, even took their women's champion Medusa, who of course came with the WWF Women's Championship, and actually threw it in the trash. Your reaction to a lot of this, because obviously I've got to experience and live through and watch a lot of this recently, but your thoughts now getting to watch it over.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the most famous one when we talk about them giving away the results is the Mankind winning the world title, which may have been one of the biggest mistakes I think they ever broadcast on WCW TV. But dude, from a business point of view, Bischoff's doing the smartest thing. He's like, dude, we can give you the results. You don't need to change the channel. Just stay here. This is live. This is, do you know what I mean? This is, anything can happen with this show. And yeah, I mean, this, like I said in one of the previous episodes, that this is one of the points where this is one of the few times that Vince has a bad moment when it comes to business by doing anything on a handshake agreement, because obviously all the guys that are working for him, they're all on a, well, look, you're going to come work for me? Sure, gentleman's agreement. WCW come along with that contract. And I think the craziest thing was like when they talked about Hogan coming in, and it was like, here's $1 million a year. You're used to working 365 days. How many days do you want to work while you're here? And it's kind of like he gives the example that someone says 100. Yep, sure, no problems. And I just find that absolutely insane that they were given that much free will to be paid an astronomical amount of money for whatever this is, 95, 96, 97, whatever it is. I think that was the most baffling part for me, because I was like, I could understood if they'd done it with, for instance, say Hogan, maybe Nash, maybe Hall, but this was just their mentality going forward. It was a case of any new guy they wanted to bring in, it was a case of, right, well, here's how much we're going to pay you. How much do you want to work? Okay, you're going to pay me 7 figures. I want to work 1 day a year. Thank you very much. It just sounds crazy, and I don't understand. Like, you can see how that this ends up playing into the downfall of WCW in the end, because it's just absolutely ludicrous.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, that would be a later downfall down the line, but at that time, it was definitely working in WCW's favour. Obviously, getting a lot of the big stars over. Obviously, WWF suffering at the time period as well. But WWF did like a spoof of WCW, sort of like with Ted Turner. But USA Network got involved, suggested it should stop. It wasn't sort of content they wanted on their network. Your reaction to seeing that?
The fact that they don't ever mention Ted's surname, and but they make it blatantly obvious who they're ever talking about, and they say that I think her name is Koplovitz or something. She was a VP for the USA Network or something, and apparently she was supposed to be good friends with Ted Turner, and she didn't want to see her friend be belittled on, do you know what I mean, on their television channel. Like I understand it, but look, the WWE are trying to do something to make you money. At the end of the day, if they're not making you money and you're telling them to stop, like essentially getting involved and putting the brakes on anything they're trying to do, it seems a bit silly. Like you're choosing your personal feelings over a business feeling. Do you know what I mean? And it's like that's the one thing I couldn't get. But hey, man, like I said, there might be something more personal going on in terms of business wise. Like I said, they're all business moguls, do you know what I mean? They're all probably wined and dined each other. They've probably gone to restaurants with each other and stuff, and it's just a case of, as a personal thing, you don't want to see your friend be insulted, but at the end of the day, you've got a business to run, so I could never understand that.
No, I can never really understand it either. But I must admit, I've never really seen these segments on Raw. It must be something I've missed. But it did seem a bit like poor taste and poor execution as well. It's not even the fact it's just poor taste, but it just wasn't delivered very well. Like it seems to be sort of go away TV for me. It doesn't engage me to want to go and watch what's going on, I suppose, with it. So I can understand why they told them to stop. But obviously,
the thing was, Ted Turner said he loved them, like because Bischoff used to record them, showed them to Turner, and Turner was like, "I think these are great. I think they're hilarious." So I don't know. Like I said, it must have just been a personal feelings for the VP of the USA Network.
It must be indeed. As I say, I would like to go back and just check them out, just to see and have a full opinion to myself, to be able to give a full-rounded view of what I'd think of it, if it was good or bad or indifferent. But certainly the USA Network was not a fan of it of the time, and obviously this is the sort of thing that they would do at the time, of a bit of spoofing, which led to, you know, a fake Razor and a fake Diesel, because obviously it came to the point, like we said, we knew talents were going to be leaving WWF, and obviously Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, and of course Kevin Nash, aka Diesel, were set to leave, and obviously they had their final show, which was a house show. I believe it was in Madison Square Garden as well, which involved Shawn Michaels. Shawn desperate to give them a moment when leaving, which of course Vince said, "Is it important to you?" And Shawn said yes. Well, it's important to me. Then gave the blessing. Of course, we got the infamous curtain call, which was of course featured Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Shawn Michaels, and of course Triple H, all in the ring together, all doing the big hug, which of course caused a massive uproar around the time period, despite getting a massive pop from all the crowd and all the masses there on that evening, which, you know, Paul Levesque actually says, you know, if you look at the time, this is what the fans want. This was the biggest reaction. Vince wasn't ready to move on with the times. A lot of wrestlers were not happy because we're still stuck in that old school time, you know, kayfabe, you know, fiction produced by the con artist. You have to keep the illusion real. You know, good guys keep with the good guys, bad guys keep with the bad guys. You do not mix it around. You always remain in character and you make it feel real. There was a saying there where I think it's Bret Hart that says, "Wrestling died that day."
Yeah, I think something along those lines, or it killed the business, one of those two. Taker didn't. They even go to Undertaker and he says he didn't like it. I mean, dude, let's be honest. What's the chances that someone in the crowd at that particular show on that particular day just so happens to have a camcorder and films that moment? That is then obviously one of the most infamous moments in the, not really necessarily the downfall, but it's just one of those infamous moments where obviously it destroys kayfabe, and that's the day, like the day they claim kayfabe died, and you're just like, what are the absolute chances that would happen? And then, as well with Nash and Hall, like this, Pritchard says as well that he kind of knew that they were going as well, because going referencing back to the skits, that they didn't want to do the skits that they were making, which Pritchard kind of basically went, if you don't, well, I don't understand why you don't want to do them, you must be going there, even though they were out and out refused it. But yeah, it's just unbelievably sucky timing for that moment just to happen. And it's like, because you'd imagine, like, for everyone who's ever seen pro wrestling at that point, if you had a couple of thousand people at the Madison Square Garden saying they all hugged at the end, no one would believe them. But the fact that just that one day, someone decides to sneak their camcorder in and capture that moment, just honestly is the most unfortunate piece of luck you could ever ask for.
It is kind of like the 2024 YouTuber that's sort of coming, or TikToker that caught that moment. Today you wouldn't get away with it in the slightest chance, but back then you would have thought it would have been completely safe, but it turned out it wasn't. Your thoughts on the curtain call was a personal feeling, obviously, because we talk about it as what it could do to the business, but how do you feel about it? Because obviously 2024 is a very different time to 1996.
It depends on when you ask me that question, because as a 10-year-old I probably don't even understand what's going on, because it's 96, so I'm like 10, 11 years old. I don't have a clue what's going on. I'm just like, okay, they were just beating each other up, now they're hugging. I don't know, like it feels like, I don't know, like as an 11-year-old, I don't think I'd have a clue. As a nearly 40-year-old guy, I'm like obviously wrestling's changed so much in the last 25 years, 30 years since that happened. I'm kind of like, do you know what I mean? Like, we get this all the time now. It's like we get people having killer matches that end up shaking hands at the end of the matches, and it's like it's nothing new to me now. It's like it's a really awkward one. I think like if I'd have been 40 years old at the time when it happened, I probably would have had a bigger opinion on it. And I think that's the problem. Is like it's a generational moment that got ruined. So you can imagine for the 40-year-olds that were in the crowd that day, and obviously the guys that it's still real to me, damn it. Like that's when like I said, the curtain drops for him, and then it's like, oh wait, this like they don't really hate each other kind of thing. And like for me, it's just like I said, it's so hard to call. But like I think if you have to be in that moment, I think, to really get an honest opinion on whether it sucked or whether it ruined the business. Because like, let's be honest, dude, we're sitting here 30 years later still talking about pro wrestling. So I think it's done all right since. Do you know what I mean? So I just, like I said, I think it has to be one of those things that you have to kind of be of a certain age at that time to get a real honest opinion out of it.
Yeah, I can completely agree with what you just said there to a certain point. I mean, the feeling with me is that I try and compare it to something we've seen since, which can make the comparison. And obviously, say it's still different time zones, different time periods, so life is different. But I go back to sort of thinking like NXT days, with the Four Horsewomen, where they all were called up to obviously being on Raw. I think it was the women's revolution at the time, obviously, and then Bayley had won the women's championship just from Sasha Banks, and then we had the moment with all of them in the ring, Charlotte and Becky as well there, that culminating moment. I thought it just felt so special with everyone there. It felt like a cool moment, a good way to say goodbye, and this four best friends that were just going to know would be the future women's wrestling, and we're going to tear it up on the next level, where it felt like it was a really fun moment. Obviously, Triple H would have been obviously someone that would have said, I support this decision because he was the one booking it. Yeah. Where obviously you look back here, it is a different time period. And like you say, there's still some people just about clinging on to the idea of the carnival idea. Is this real? Is it not? But then at the same time, Shawn says backstage, I thought everyone knew by this point. It's kind of given that this was what pro wrestling was, that the secret was already out. So it wasn't really harming or hurting anybody. So for me, like you said there, 30 odd years later, we're all still talking about it. So it's memorable in some way. It's seen as one of the biggest things that happened at a certain time period. But so for me, I look at it and say, even if it had its negatives, for it to still be talked about in a way today, can have its positives as well, because it made that big of impact on the industry. But obviously, just as the final notes from it, obviously, Vince thought he would potentially has made a mistake, and he let that sort of go on his watch. And he said, obviously, I can't really punish Diesel and Razor because they're gone. Shawn's my world champion. So, Hunter, you're going for the fall guy for this one. You're meant to win King of the Ring. Not happening for you. Get used to the taste of eating shit and getting used to liking it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's now just a period piece. Like, it's just a moment in wrestling history that really has no significance on today's product. Like, it's where the business changed. But like you said, like the wrestlers that were coming through at the time, we've got no more bodybuilder, athletic kind of guys. We've got Shawn Michaels, we've got Bret Harts, we've got Mankind's, we've got Stone Cold's, we've got Rocks. There is no, do you know what I mean, picture perfect wrestler anymore. The business at this point is beginning to change. So yeah, it's just one of those moments in time that will just stay there. But then it's like, for example, like if you watch like say a UK comedy over here, Only Fools and Horses, I'm old enough to appreciate the comedy of the show because it's a very dated comedy. You only understand the references if you grew up with that stuff or if you lived through those periods. Like if you was to get kids to watch it nowadays, they're just going to be like, I don't understand like why half of it's funny. But you know what I mean, for people that lived through it, we still find it hilarious to this day. And it's exactly like that. It's one of those things that in its time was a very important moment, but 30 years later, it's not as big a deal now as what it initially was.
No, I could agree with that indeed. And obviously, going into Pastors New then for Razor and Deez, obviously going to WCW, the portrayal of the characters were almost as if they were sent over from WWE to come and do some sort of hostile takeover. The Outsiders, a sort of gimmick that Eric Bischoff had wanted to do but couldn't find the right people to fit the mold, but they were the right people to do so. WWE ended up getting sued by WWE at this point because of the fact that fans didn't know. It was probably, as Cody Rhodes said, it's kind of like the last time in wrestling where, you know, people really was questioning, is this real or is it not?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously, when we get onto the next episode, like there is, like they talk about it, like that seems to get to another point. Like I think it's just, it's not necessarily an instantaneous transitional period. Like it probably takes a couple of years for them to definitively get out of essentially the kayfabe period, the golden era, before they move into like new generation Attitude Era. Once we get past Attitude Era, I think like all the cards are laid out at that point, and there's no more trying to hide it. And I just think it's a really long transitional period. I mean, for people like Cody, you can probably, I can understand what he's saying, but I just think it's a long transitional period.
Yeah, I can see it. And the thing is, as well, I actually disagree with this comment of the last time people question, is it real or is it not moment. I think when you look with CM Punk's pipe bomb in 2011, that's something that was the sweet spot where everyone didn't know one way or another. And you could even argue the build to this year's WrestleMania, everything felt so real with the fact it was going to be Rock versus Roman, Cody with a We Want Cody movement actually getting into position. So I don't know if I actually agree with that comment from Cody, although politically I can see where he was going with it. At least it does feel a nice narrative for the documentary. But at the same time, obviously, you know, it got them to lead that they were actually not working. They had to be asked in the Great American Bash, were you working for WWF anymore? And they were like, no. And that's what led them then to saying they had the third man, of course, which was revealed to be Hogan, of course, at Bash of the Beach 1996. And there's, you know, we still talk about the sweet spot, but this was a heel turn that probably almost went too far, seeing all the garbage that was thrown into the ring, a fan trying to jump the barricade to get into the ring. To this day, I still feel that this possibly is the greatest heel turn of all time. And they did ask Bruce Pritchard, I believe, and Vince McMahon if they've actually considered Hogan going heel in WWF, and the fact that it had not been done. And obviously just said like they missed out on a gold mine not doing it, the fact that the way WCW did it. But I mean, I would just say quickly to give an opinion on it, I don't think WWE would have done it as well as the way WCW did it. To do it in that sort of way, in that sort of fashion, Hogan is the third man of this questionable group, that doesn't work for WWF anymore, but was the question of outsiders, they don't belong here. Hogan was the perfect fit for that because he had been that guy, the other side, then wanting to take over this side as well.
I literally put it in my notes as well. I said, is the Hogan heel turn the best heel turn in the business? And I'm going to put my neck out there and say, do you know what I think actually is? Like, because like I said, we're in that transitional period, and you've got Hogan, who's been this baby face for the longest time. Like at this point, maybe 12 years that he's been the face for, and to see him finally get that heel turn. And the thing is this isn't the only time that turning a babyface heel bites Vince on the arse, because he does the same thing with John Cena. He does the same thing with Austin, not necessarily with Austin, but we obviously remember the handshake at Mania that was kind of like, this is terrible and should never have been done. It's almost like he could never get his top star to turn at the right time. Even like with Roman Reigns, like the amount of times he would force Roman Reigns down our throats as this almighty babyface, and obviously, like I remember he obviously he should have won the Rumble when I believe it was Batista won it, and he ended up losing, and then he goes on to win it the following year when no one cares anymore. And it's like, it just seems to be a cliche that Vince has, that he just doesn't know when to turn his top stars. But yeah, like I would have to agree, man. I have to say this probably is the biggest heel turn, like the shock factor to it, and like even to talk about like the people jumping the barrier. Scott Hall sticks his foot in on that guy's head as well. And as well, there was another thing I wanted to mention as well. In the promo videos they're doing with Nash and Hall, when Nash jackknifes Bischoff off the ramp through the table, that guy could not do a jackknife power to save his life, because he almost flops that. And he's meant to be in his prime at that point. He just really shouldn't have been doing that move. But I digress. But yeah, it's like I said, it's Vince's downfall that he never done that. But like I said, what's done is done now, innit? We can't really change the past. But yeah, this is the real turning point for WCW. This is where they soon go on to absolutely dominating TV ratings. And this, for me as well, I think is the definitive moment when we get into the NWO, where the fans' opinion on wrestling change, because it's no longer yay good guys, boo bad guys. It's boo good guys, yay bad guys. Do you know what I mean? Like, everyone loved the NWO. They loved the mentality, the gang culture it was supposed to kind of infamously portray, and like, do you know what I mean? They wanted to see the bad guys beat up the good guys and spray paint NWO over their bodies. It was just a cool thing to do, and it's like this, like I said, for WCW is a major turning point for them.
Certainly was. And obviously when you look at Nitro as a show, it was live compared to WWE being taped. WWE was going for the younger based audience, and he wanted Eric Bischoff wanted it to be a bit more reality based, none of these fantasy characters really go for that sort of like 18 to 30 sort of demographic as well. And this was edgy content with the NWO. Obviously when they went to invade the ring, I think the following night on Nitro in Florida, and then Rey Mysterio gets sort of flung into like this sort of like, I don't know, caravan sort of thing in the car park area. It looked proper sort of dodgy, but looked proper sort of scary, but looked very real and sort of cool to see on TV as well. And obviously it starts the reign, which Eric Bischoff, he knows what he's doing, but he's dragging it out to tell you WCW goes on to win for 83 weeks straight. It is the name of his podcast, after all. And do you know what? Fair play to him, because he got the job done for 83 weeks, which is more than most or anyone has probably ever been able to say previously when Vince McMahon has been at the helm. And no one will ever be able to top it, because Vince is no longer in the helm now. It will never be changed. So Bischoff was the guy to do so. But Vince always talked about Ted Turner. He always talked about Ted Turner being the competition. Always saying, Ted's, coming in, taking, trying to take away from this family business, coming for me. Obviously, we were a small family business, and it's like, well, weren't you the guy that actually did this to everybody in the territories in the 80s? Yeah, but it was different, because I was trying to, get business. I was trying to make everything better for the industry. But this is actually a personal get and trying to go for me and put me out of business. It was like I always felt like the hamster was really doing some runs on the sort of treadmill at that point to try and get around that question, because for me, there's no way out on that one. It's basically you're being done to you what you did to others previously. It's the way I read it anyway. Yeah,
and the thing was as well was, like I said, that this is obviously bites Vince in the ass, because again he's dealing with gentleman's handshakes, and where nothing's binding, they'd have no loyalty to you. Whereas Ted Turner is smart enough to tie these guys down to contracts, so that the fact that they have to stay in the business, they can't go anywhere else, they have to show up. Do you know what I mean? They're contractually obliged to be there. And obviously this is the learning point for Vince, where he's like, okay, yeah, I have to do this as well. And it's like I said, it's crazy that even at this time that Vince has still got guys on handshake deals instead of contracts like that. That baffled me as well, because I was like, obviously they go on to do the 83 weeks, and it's kind of like Vince at this point is now trying to tie down everyone, because he doesn't want anyone else to leave to go to WCW, because obviously they're doing things that Vince is afraid to do, and this is what's essentially winning them the 83 weeks, because Turner's like, just go out there and make me money. And Bischoff's like, sure, okay, I'll do whatever I'm going to do then.
And he said it probably made most sense for him to, the idea was put for him to join NWO, and he was kind of seen as like the owner kind of thing. So he said, well, yeah, I should do it. I should be the sort of the bad guy, evil owner to be part of the NWO. And obviously, you know, Eric does make an interesting point as well when Vince only talks about Ted Turner, not talking about him. And I think actually could be an element of truth in this, because we know Vince is a very good storyteller. He's always been about the story. To sort of put himself as the underdog against Ted Turner, the one with, you know, the billionaire money against him, rather than actually going against Eric Bischoff, someone who'd been creatively in the hot seat for about 18 months, someone who'd actually been in the business with WCW since 93, 94, someone that actually been doing a sort of an audition for the for announcer's job with WWF in 1990 and got turned down. Vince doesn't regret that, by the way, of not taking on Eric Bischoff at the time. Obviously, was the reasoning for it, but still, with how everything played out, I guess he can say that now in hindsight. But at the time, must have been a bit of squeaky bum time, knowing that Bischoff definitely sort of had the cards to the chest. But it would have made Vince look bad had he said he was losing to the novice. It looked much better on his way to gather more sympathy if he's saying Ted Turner, the billionaire Ted.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like he's trying to do damage limitations by comparing himself to Turner instead of Bischoff. Like, I've been like, obviously at this point he's been running WWE for 10 plus years, so he should know, like, he's created WrestleMania, he's done all this great stuff, and the fact that this guy who failed to be either a ring announcer or a commentator for my show is beating me on creative is, like, obviously it's probably like really embarrassing, and it's one of the moments where Vince probably has to unfortunately walk away with his tail between his legs. But again, like I said, damage control. I'll compare myself to Ted Turner because Ted Turner owns WCW. I'm the owner of WWE. I'm not going to compare myself to essentially the Bruce Pritchard of WCW. I'm going to compare myself to the guy that owns the company.
Like that comparison you've made there. That's a fun one. It actually really works as well. But obviously you talk about then trying to tie people down. The centerpiece for the WWF jigsaw at that point is Bret the Hitman Hart, of course, who has said he's an artist in the ring, by the way. I'm not sure which episode that was in the first three he said that, but comparing to how people wrestle in the ring, he compared his stuff to be art, which I thought was quite fun to hear. And to be fair, I would actually agree. I always thought that Bret was a great technician and a great storyteller in the ring. But obviously Bret was given a new deal to sign with WWF to not go anywhere, and it was a 20-year contract. He did say he'd be staying with WWF for life, but not very long to it. Vince McMahon kind of regretted that decision, so I can't really afford to pay him that lucrative money. Really, it's too much. I could build new stars, I can make new stars from all of that. I don't need to keep Bret. So he managed to tell Bret to go to WCW. Actually, the loopholes were pointed out in the contract of how he could get to WCW. A deal was agreed so he would move to WCW, but he was still the WWF champion. So we needed to do business, and we needed him to drop the championship, and we needed him to drop it to his enemy at the time, Shawn Michaels, who Bret and Shawn have both described Shawn Michaels as an absolute prick in 1997.
Fantastic. The fact that Shawn blatantly turns around and goes, I'll be honest, I was a complete prick during this time. Like, props to the guy, because not many people are going to sit there and admit that they were a complete dickhead during the period. So props to Shawn Michaels for admitting that.
Absolutely. And obviously they said about how sort of promo segments turned into a bit of shoot segments on Raw. You know, Shawn Michaels saying about all the zeros to make him sign the contract, and also explaining about having sunny days, which of course Bret was being a married man as well. And obviously Sunny has her reputation, which isn't needing to be elaborated any further in this one, unfortunately. But you know, it's the accusation was there nonetheless. Of course, yeah, you get the impression it pressed the buttons and it did what it needed to do. So when it comes to Survivor Series 1997 and Bret was going to leave the following day to go to WCW, Vince didn't want a repeat of Medusa. He didn't want the champion to go over to WCW because that sort of damages the brand, and it damaged even more with the top championship. So the job was to get the title off Bret. And I mean, Shawn's words were, I'm not sure the problem for Bret was losing the title, but the problem was losing to me. That was the problem at the time. Shawn Michaels was the problem. And obviously Bret has said to Vince that actually he didn't really want to drop it in Canada either. But Vince was saying that we need to get the job done, we need to find a way. However, nothing could seem to come to terms, and that led to a conversation between Vince, Triple H, and Shawn, didn't it, Steve?
Yeah, apparently the phone call between the three of them where Triple H basically turned around and says, "Fuck him." And I'm like, dude, like, you can obviously see where Triple H's mentality is at the time. Him and Shawn are boys. Do you know what I mean? He's like trying to look out for his best intentions. And obviously, but I get the impression that at this point, well, Triple H is trying to get back in Vince's good graces after the whole curtain call thing. So he's like, if Brett's not going to do the job, we'll do the job for him. And like, yeah, just what a scumbag, man. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, I mean, this is another one of these, like, we sit there and say that the curtain call is one of those like really fortunate events that someone happens to be in the arena as well. But the fact that at the time that this happens, they're doing a WWE home exclusive about Bret Hart. And like, they've got film crews following around the whole time, and like half of this stuff is like half of the backstage stuff with the Screwjob is caught on camera because they're following Bret around making one of their WWE home video things. And I'm like, Vince has got possibly the worst luck when it comes to this kind of stuff because he just can't catch a break. But yeah, it just in general, like, you can see, like I said, you can see the mentality. Triple H is trying to obviously still get back in Vince's good book. Shawn is Shawn, who's already admitted that he is a prick at this point. So you can inevitably just see what's going to happen.
I mean, to be fair, that home exclusive must have been a hell of a video, to be fair to own at that point. It probably was a good must-buy purchase. I don't think I've seen it, so can't comment if anything was used or not used on that. It could have actually been... I
think I bought it as well. I think they actually re-released it on DVD because I remember Bret was on the cover of the thing as well. Like, and I'm sure I bought it and watched it all because it obviously talks about the screw job and all that kind of stuff. And obviously that's where I discovered that Bret Hart is a very self-egotistical person. Like, and he really thinks of himself highly.
We've seen a few interviews of Bret Hart in his time, but yeah, I mean, obviously, there is that you went on to say there was the phone call or the discussion there of like, you know, we're going to do our thing, and obviously the sort of saying it was said then was to Shawn and Triple H to do the business, and then don't say it was you, lie. You knew nothing about it. You know, just don't go out there, do it, and then we go. So they were out there, and obviously Shawn goes on to put on the sharpshooter. As Bret says, he doesn't put it on correctly. Bret corrects him mid-move to put it on correctly, and then as he's in it, Ebner is there looking at it, and that's when Vince is screaming, "Ring the bell!" And the one with the bell doesn't want to do it, so he's like, "Ring the fucking bell," which of course you see Hebner sort of going for it. When you can, and the thing is, I've not seen the Screwjob for a long time. It's been many years since I've watched it, but you can see Bret Hart as that bell's being rung. He's kind of trying to get out of the hold as desperately as possible, realizing what's going on, but he doesn't quite do it. But he does sort of, like you said, you get a lot of phlegm when it comes to a frothy mouth when you've been wrestling for 15, 20 minutes. It is a great shot. You get one straight in Vince's face, straight in the eye as well. Yeah, not charming.
Yeah, I mean, just to look like you look back at, like, obviously you look at the people involved. So Pritchard claims in his interview in this that he didn't know that the screw job was going to happen, and I'm like, I kind of believe him and kind of don't believe him because, dude, you're the joint booker for the company at this point, and if you don't know, surprisingly, the ref's in on it, Shawn and Triple H are in it, and Vince is in it. I've got to believe that you know at least something. And then, like, I've seen the shoot interviews with Hebner where he turns around and he turns around. He talks about the screw job and he turns around and he said, "I was told, like, to count the or do the tap out and then get out of the building." And he essentially, from that, if you look back and watch the screw job, as soon as that bell rings, Hebner's gone. Like, he has pegged it. He is out the building. He's already in his car. And he's already like 10 miles down the road. And yeah, like you said, if you watch it back, you see Bret. He's still trying to get out of the sharpshooter at this point, and Bret doesn't have a clue as to what's happened. And then all of a sudden, it twigs for him that he's been screwed. And yeah, like, just hawks up the biggest loogie and he squares it straight between the eyeballs. It is a great shot. And like, you couldn't do that any better if you tried. Like the fact, again, perfectly coincidental timing when it comes to Vince McMahon. He just seems to have these moments where, you know what I mean, this stuff happens to him and it's just so fortunately timed. But yeah, then obviously we get Brett at the end, you know, right in the big WCW in the air, and you're kind of like, wait, what's going on? And this is what I'm saying about this transitional period, because we're all sitting there, like, you'd sit there and watch this and be like, hang on a minute, why is he doing the WCW thing? I don't understand what's going on. Because obviously if you're like not savvied up and you're not clued in, you're not reading the dirt sheets at this point, you haven't got any clue, and you're like, why is Brett banging on about WCW anymore? I'm not realizing that it's his last night. And just to go back to the thing where Vince, like, I had to respect Vince for this as well, where he turned around and just told Shawn and Triple H to just deny, and put it all on me. Like, that guy was willing to take all the hate, all the blame, everything, and protect two of his talent as well. Like, I've got to respect him in some ways like that. Don't get me wrong, it's still a scummy move, but he's like, you don't see many people nowadays, especially people that run businesses, that are quite willing to take all the stick for something if it goes wrong. So I mean, I've got to give him props for that, but yeah, it's still a scummy move to do.
Absolutely. And of course, he did sort of give Brett his moment backstage. He said that I'm going to go back there and I'm going to let him, he's going to clock me one. I'm just going to take it. But of course, there was a little bit of difference of opinions, let's say, of how it happened. Vince said he just got clocked once and knocked out. Brett said that it was a bit of a wrestling match and a shouting match between the two of them, and then Brett clocked him with an uppercut, and he was sort of knocked for 6. But one thing seems to be agreed on is that Vince was concussed after that shot nonetheless, and did have a bit of a shiner as well.
Well, the thing that I can take from this is that they cut to the Undertaker, and he basically said he agrees with Brett's side of the story, that there was a fight and he doesn't even know how Brett managed to punch him. Obviously, Brett describes that he essentially uppercutted the guy, but Undertaker was like, I have no idea how he got his fist through and connected with the guy. And like, I'd like to think that anyone in that situation would have done the same thing. And it's like, it's props to the Undertaker for, like, I don't think we've ever actually heard anyone's honest opinions from the Screwjob that night what happened, because obviously in the like I said, all that backstage stuff where you've got Triple H standing outside the locker room with Julia, Brett's ex-wife, I believe. That's all from that Bret Hart documentary. Like, we see all this stuff, but there's no one. We don't hear a definitive like answer of what actually happened inside the room. So for Taker to turn around and say, "Oh yeah, like they were going hammer and tong, and Brett just manages to uppercut him out of nowhere," I've got to finally get a bit of respect for that. For that, we finally know that what actually happened in that room.
Absolutely, indeed, yeah, so true. And I mean, obviously, Brett did say one of his proudest moments ever. He clocked him really hard, really proud moment of what he'd achieved there, and said that he deserved every moment of it. But yeah, obviously 14 years of working every day and giving everything 100%, missing like birthdays, Christmases, everything that was going around the clock for Vince. And obviously that was his sort of thank you to get the screw job, and that was him gone and that was him off. And obviously what ended up really being a scummy moment, really, but actually ended up probably in hindsight being a real turning point when it comes to the Monday Night War and turning as well, because Vince created a character for himself, which obviously will branch then into episode 4, which obviously will be Attitude, which will be the next one we'll be discussing. But obviously at the same time, Brett going to WCW at a time when things would start to be the downfall for that company. Not of Brett's doing, not of Brett's fault, but just things creatively started to go just at opposite ends of the spectrum, and just the momentum from this night, I think, just seemed to somehow go in WWF's favor, for how or whatever reason. But there was something we should just quickly touch on as well. Obviously, Brett did get emotional because he did say that Owen Hart was very calming whilst he was in the ring, and we did see an emotional moment from Brett on camera.
Yeah, and like, it's not very often that we see Brett talk about Owen, and like, he's able to show signs of emotion and signs of weakness when talking about his brother. Like, I don't remember anything from the time ever seeing Brett ever show any emotion, because obviously this is like the interview is obviously in 2022, and obviously remembering his brother is obviously quite emotional. But even like after Owen's passing, I don't remember Brett showing any signs of weakness. Maybe it might have just been a case of like stereotype hard man doesn't want to show weakness by crying macho kind of thing, maybe. But it was nice to see almost the human side of Brett, because like for so long the guy bangs on about how like he thinks he's God's gift to pro wrestling and all this kind of stuff. So for him to be a bit humble and like I said, just show that human side of him, where, do you know what I mean, his brother, like it's nice to see him actually show that his brother mattered to him. So I really like that bit about him.
Absolutely. To be fair, I do think that he is God's gift to pro wrestling. If you go back to me as an early fan, wasn't one of my favourites to start with. But no, I completely, wholly agree. It was a touching moment, and obviously I'm aware that Owen Hart is a big talking point in episode 4, which we'll be obviously covering on the next one. Which obviously this episode that we've actually gone through, obviously he's been a bit more business, a bit more cutthroat. Just shows that Vince, you know, like he said, he doesn't play fair. He's someone, if something needs to be done, he would do it, and he would do it for the benefit of his company and the business, and he will not lose in business. That was his way and his attitude of doing it. There's been quite a number of examples that have shown it in this, even through times where tough, where his back was against the wall in a losing effort to WCW. He found his way to claw his way back and remain in the race, even when he thought maybe it might be a financially tough time for them to survive. So obviously that is episode 3. Any final words you have for us before we wrap things up?
No, and just like I said, it's a nice, like I said, every episode goes on, like my notes are getting longer and longer progressively for each episode, and the fact that we're about to touch on essentially not financially, I would just probably say like their generally busiest period in their professional wrestling history. We're stepping into the Attitude Era now, which is where so much stuff happens. The company does a complete sort of U-turn and goes back to being the number one company. And like I said, Owen's brought up in the next episode, and there's just so many things to talk about just in general from the business side, which is nice to see as well, because obviously, again, like I said a little while ago, this transitional period, and we go more into it in there, and we can see at this in the next one, how the change in the business is happening, and how Vince like steers his ship through it, and like steers WWE through this transitional period. And like it's like I said, I'm waiting for the 5th and 6th one, because I guarantee you they're obviously going to be the talking points, but we're starting to get to the real meat and bone now, the stuff that obviously, especially for us, like that was the best period we ever watched. Well, according to some of us, you know what I mean, we've probably seen it. Don't get me wrong, it's not all great, but it's very fondly remembered.
It's fondly remembered. I think when you have the rose-tinted glasses on, when you go back and see some of it now, though, like with every time period, it does have those. And there was questionable moments at the time, you know, choppy PP, Kennel from Hell. There were some really bad times as well.
Dude,
in
you said choppy PP. I've seen episode 4. The episode 4 has possibly the greatest scene in the whole 4 episodes so far. And I'm glad you mentioned choppy PP, because it's got something to do with that, ironically.
It was wouldn't be surprised to see that is brought up somewhere in it, but yeah.
Put it this way, I laughed my ass off when they did this bit.
I look forward to it, and if you look forward to it as well, then drop a like on the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're new to the channel as well, if you've enjoyed this video, and the playlist is available, so make sure to go and check out every episode so far. You can do so on the side of your screen right now. But thank you all for watching. Look after yourselves. We'll see you for the next episode 4, Attitude.